Hello and welcome to Hear These Words, a podcast from Good Shepherd Episcopal Church in Tequesta, Florida. I'm Derek Larson, the Associate Rector here at Good Shepherd.
I'm Sanford Groff, I'm the Rector.
And each week on the podcast, we discuss the upcoming readings assigned to Sunday from the Revised Common Lectionary. And this week is the last Sunday after the Epiphany, February 11th, 2024. And the words we hear are from 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Psalm 50, verses 1 through 6, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 3 through 6, and the Gospel of Mark, chapter 9, verses 2 through 9.
A short Epiphany season.
A very short Epiphany. We're already moving into Lent. This is the end.
Yeah, Lent starts on Ash Wednesday, Valentine's Day. Again this year, it was Valentine's Day
a few years ago
on the 14th, and that's because Easter, of course, is not a movable feast,
but it moves.
Mm-hmm. and therefore we kind of we find the date of Easter, and then they back it up to find the date of Ash Wednesday, and then Epiphany just gets, like an accordion.
Yeah.
Gets crunched or it gets expanded.
So these days we just use a calendar. Whatever the calendar says, we do it. Do you happen to recall how you calculate Easter, the day of Easter?
It has to do with the moon.
Right.
And I only know a deep dive about this because at my old church, we were programming outdoor lighting.
Oh.
And I had to give the lighting programmer, we were doing different colors, and we did it based on the seasons of the church. And so it was easy enough to give him a spreadsheet that said, on December 25th, we want, these Christmas colored lights, and
cool.
On these other dates, we wanted these colored lights. But with Easter, I had to do this spreadsheet, and I had to figure out a way to do an Excel formula. This is really nerdy. I'm sorry. An Excel formula to find the date of Easter, and it took me a while, but I think I found a way to do it. And I ended up giving him an Excel spreadsheet of the next 75 years of Easter dates.
Oh, really?
And so over at St. Mark's, in some closet that holds the lighting program for if you're ever over by the Gardens Hospital, you look out and you're at night, look out on the front of the church, you'll see the color, and it's Easter's white, Lent is purple, Advent is blue.
That's so cool.
But the purple and the white for Easter, and I think actually Easter Day, it's like a pink and maybe like light green, or some kind of fun spring colors. So, but that is a movable that changes every year, and there's an Excel spreadsheet.
On year 76 at St. Mark's, it's going to be like a Y2K.
It's going to be a problem.
Moment,
There's going to be a problem. I'm going to be dead and gone, but
there will be a
problem.
So I think, if I remember right, Easter is the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. I think.
Okay.
I think that's
I just
right.
Googled it. I was really trying to find an Excel formula.
Right, that I could set that up
for that.
And I think it says it in the prayer book, but
I think it does,
like
too.
I said, these days, you just follow the calendar.
You don't need to know. Or for the next 75 years, you can just follow
the Excel, the lights at St. Mark's.
The lights at St. Mark's Excel spreadsheet. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Just getting into some church calendar stuff.
That's fun.
And just on the other note, right, to get into the readings for a minute, the Gospel is the Transfiguration, right, in Mark.
Yes, which is always the last Sunday
of Epiphany, but it is not the Feast of the Transfiguration.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? It's not a quiz. I don't know.
No.
I actually don't know.
I don't know why either. I don't think the lectionary. The Feast of the Transfiguration predates the Revised Common Lectionary, to my understanding. Mm-hmm. So there is in the calendar a feast day of the Transfiguration, which is in the summer. I looked it up right before we recorded this, and I guess it's...
I prepped him.
You did prep me. And I guess it's August 6th.
Right.
And I remember that it was in the summer. But technically, it's not the last day of the Epiphany.
Right.
But I think more and more and more it is being celebrated and recognized as an alternative or a secondary feast day of the Transfiguration. Because August 6th is not often on a Sunday.
Right.
And so the church these days, if you're not going to church every day, you probably aren't going to remember or know the feast day of the Transfiguration.
Right.
Unless it happens to fall on a Sunday, which it did, I think, last year, the year before, I forget. And so the last Sunday of Epiphany, now that we use the Revised Common Lectionary, which we've been using for a few decades, I forget when this lectionary came.
The 70s, right?
Perhaps, and it was formed from previous lectionaries as well, so I don't know the whole history of celebrating the Transfiguration on the last Sunday of the Epiphany. But already we really are celebrating it much more like a feast day. We'll be wearing white.
White.
Because we're recognizing it as a feast day, even though technically it is not a major feast day. It is a Sunday.
And that is one of the hallmarks of the Revised Common Lectionary, and we see that probably the biggest change, I guess, over the decades has been Palm Sunday, where you see the RCL shoehorning in, the passion
narrative,
and where we start outside and we do the Palm Sunday gospel, but then we come inside and we go through the Passion gospel, which is new, in church years, because that historically has been Holy Week. So you would come to church, probably all week, but Monday, Thursday, Good Friday, the vigil on Saturday or Sunday morning, early Sunday morning, and that you would get that whole Passion. You read the Passion on Good Friday, but I think the thinking was, we need to make sure people hear the Passion on a Sunday, and by Easter,
it's here during the week.
For those that aren't here during the week. So by Sunday, it's Easter. It's too late. Too late.
Yeah.
So they just.
Though, I was talking with other clergy about this last year, and evidently there is some historical precedent for Passion Sunday as well.
Oh, is it?
The Good Friday readings have been observed on the Friday before, which always confuses me because we get the Good Friday reading, and then we go back to Monday, Thursday, and get the Good Friday reading again on Good Friday.
But there are times throughout Christian history that we've done that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know
predating
the RCL.
The modern times of the RCL and of folks attending only on Sundays rather than during the week. And but I don't know that history. I was told that by some other folks, and I was interested in that. Yeah. But for us, we're observing the last Sunday after the Epiphany, which is the Transfiguration, which is also kind of an interesting thing in the Revised Common Lectionary, because depending on how long it is, we get more or less of the story of Jesus. So I always think of Advent as the time where we prepare for the coming of Jesus. Christmas is the time when we celebrate that Jesus has come. And then Epiphany is the time when we get to know Jesus.
Right, the revealing.
We get to see the stories of his miracles and hear the lessons of his teaching and all of those types of things. So this will be our sixth week in the Epiphany season, and last week we were still in Mark 1.
Right. And we took 3 weeks in Mark 1.
We did.
Yeah.
And now suddenly, in this week, we're in Mark 9.
Right.
So we've jumped over the story just so that we can get to the Transfiguration. But then once we get into Lent, we are going to back up again so that we can get the temptation narrative and some others as well. But
good.
Well, shall we? Yeah, we'll get to Mark.
Yeah.
But first, why don't we look at our first reading, which is from the book of 2 Kings, chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. And this is a famous story. Even if we don't know all the details well, we know it because we sing about it. Swing low, sweet chariot, and other things. This is the story of Elijah being taken up into heaven on a chariot of fire. And the real emphasis of this story, though, is not just about Elijah being taken up to heaven, but it's about the mentorship and the relationship between Elijah and his mentee, his follower, disciple Elisha.
Right.
Elijah and Elisha.
J comes before S.
That's
how I always remember it, the alphabet.
And so they're walking around. It appears that Elijah knows something's up, and so he's kind of trying to shake Elisha off him. I don't know if he's trying to protect him or what, but 3 times in our gospel, or in our reading, the first reading, 3 times Elijah says, "Elisha, I gotta go a little further. Why don't you hang back?" And Elisha says, "Nope, I am not leaving your side." And so they travel around Israel, and along the way, prophets come up to Elisha and said, "Do you know that your master is going to be taken away from you today?" And Elisha says, "Yes, I know. Shh, stay silent about that." And finally, towards the end, Elisha asks Elisha a bold question. He says, "When you leave," because I'm picking up all of these hints that you're about to leave, "when you leave, can I have a double portion of the Spirit that is upon you?" And Elijah is this larger than life figure who's done all of these miracles and has proclaimed all of these prophecies, has spoken the word of God. And so Elisha is wanting that for himself, and he wants even more of that. It's this bold ask. And Elijah tells Elisha, "If you see me taken away, then yes, you will have a double portion of the Spirit." And sure enough, not long after that, the chariots of fire swoop down. They take away Elijah. Elisha is just shocked and kind of, exclaiming. It says here, "Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." It's not really a full sentence there. He doesn't know what to say. And then he can no longer see Elijah. He grasps his own clothes and tore them into pieces. And then the rest of the story, he heads back home and takes up the mantle and becomes Elijah for the people. He performs more miracles and has more power and becomes this significant person. So anyway, I think we're hearing this passage because it pairs with the Transfiguration well for first, just the reason that Elijah appears on the mountain when we get to the Transfiguration. But also because this is sort of a revealing where heaven and earth come close to one another. And Elisha sees his master Elijah in a way he hadn't seen him before, when heaven kind of comes down and points to him. Yeah.
It's, it's one of the famous, images, or one of the famous scenes of the Bible is this taking up into heaven and the chariot in the whirlwind. However, for whatever reason, I'm thinking about founders and their predecessors, right? Yeah. The larger than life. And this can be in business. It can be in church world, priests, right? It can be in families.
Yeah.
This might be a little personal anecdote that I'm just thinking on at this moment. My grandfather died right before I started here at Good Shepherd. And my grandfather was 93 and a half and died in November. And Grandpa was, larger than life. I mean, he was a jovial and large figure in the life of many, many people. And he had 6 children, and four biologic and 2 through marriage. And we were there at the funeral at the Episcopal Church, and up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and the 6 children were all there with all their families, and we were occupying, the first number of rows in the church. And during the remembrance that my uncle gave, and he did an excellent job, it put things in a different perspective for me that was akin to Elijah and Elisha, around how the 6 of these children had to navigate their own way. My aunts and my uncles and my father had to navigate their own way, even when Grandpa was alive. And now in his death, they're navigating their own way, kind of in his wake, so to speak. Right. And it's not a bad thing. It's just a dynamic that I think Elisha was brave to bring up. You're a big guy. And then to make the bold request that I be given, I, Elisha, be given a double portion of what you have in spirit, so that I too can follow, where you have led the way. But I think that's, I've long thought of myself not as a founder. I don't think I'm good at founding or starting things, but I think of myself personally as someone who really likes to take something that someone else has founded and then build it up. I like to be Elisha rather than Elijah in my own personal and professional life. So I'm walking, I'm following in big footsteps of Father Bob, Father now Bishop Doug, and that doesn't. I think it's something to be aware of, but it is something that we there are people who are really good at having that entrepreneurial founding spirit, and then I think there's some people like I consider myself one of them, who are decently good at following and trying to do something in the wake of someone else.
I like that. And I think another theme of this passage, and a theme of all of the passages, is a theme that we often get in Advent. Pay attention. Keep awake, keep aware, pay attention. And the theme here is that Elisha doesn't want to miss what happens to Elijah.
Right.
And then even at the end, Elijah says, if you see it, then you can have it. And Elisha has already demonstrated that he's not going anywhere and that he is paying attention.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lesson here as well, not only about taking the mantle from those that go before you and continuing their work and building it into something for a new context or for a new time or a new generation, but also paying attention to those that have gone before you and learning from them and learning from their work, paying attention to the context, paying attention to see where God has been in order for you to be able to follow God where God is going, right? Good. Our Psalm 50, verses 1 through 6, just a few verses this time. It begins, "The Lord, the God of gods, has spoken. He has called the earth from the rising of the sun to its setting. Out of Zion, perfect in its beauty, God reveals himself in glory. Our God will come and will not keep silence. Before him there is a consuming flame, and round about him a raging storm. He calls the heavens and the earth from above to witness the judgment of his people. Gather before me my loyal followers, those who have made a covenant with me and sealed it with sacrifice. Let the heavens declare the rightness of his cause, for God himself is judge." That last line there, God himself is judge. That is the image we're supposed to be getting from this passage, that God is a judge sitting there at the front of a courtroom, and it is the people that are about to be judged, God's people that are about to be judged. And who are there as the witnesses? The whole heavens and the whole earth are there as witnesses. So this is a psalm of judgment, and it's important to note, judgment isn't just about judging badly or judging wrongdoing, but sifting through and judging the good as well. So God is standing here looking at God's people, looking for both the good and the bad, the healthy and the unhealthy, the just and the unjust.
Right. And I just, he calls the earth, right? He calls the heavens and the earth from above. And then the last line, let the heavens declare, right? So God has gathered heaven and earth to bear witness. And then at the judgment, so to speak, God is not alone in the judgment, but rather that all creation, or the heavens declare something, and in this case, the heavens affirm, and so the imagery of nature speaking, or the nature witnessing, the personification of nature in this might be a little bit hard for us as modern people to hear. How is nature witnessing or speaking? How is nature judging or declaring? And yet, I think that for those of us, or who might be more in touch with nature, we would say absolutely nature speaks, right? I don't consider myself one of those people necessarily, but I wish I was, and it does give us. Again, and this has been a theme the last couple of weeks, it gives us another way in which we are grounded to God through nature, through our embodied reality.
Yeah.
We're not just, the Psalms will not let us just be in kind of ethereal spiritual land as disembodied spirits who connect with God, but that we are very rooted and grounded in the creation, which is where God meets us.
Yeah. Well, verse 3, it says, our God will come and will not keep silence. And at first I was struck by that, saying God will not keep silence. I've always experienced God in the silence. And I think that there are different images of God as both still and silent, and as loud and the one who breaks silence or proclaims. But I think also kind of the point here is that it is us that are meant to keep silent. We are the ones who are meant to keep silent. And then when we keep silent, that's when we can hear God speaking often through the heavens and the earth, through nature. We hear the voice of nature as an extension of the voice of God. But we only hear how much nature is actually speaking to us when we ourselves keep silence. And it's at that moment that we realize that maybe nature is not so silent after all.
We meet God in the stillness, not because God is still, but because we are still.
Right. Good.
Moving on.
The second reading this week, it's 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 3 through 6. So through the season after the Epiphany, we've been working our way through 1 Corinthians. But because we're at the end of the season, we're jumping to a different passage, 2 Corinthians. So while this is still written by Paul or someone writing in the name of Paul to the church in Corinth, keep in mind that we are breaking our connection with the 1 Corinthians that we've been reading and picking up a totally different letter, a totally different context about something else. And here Paul writes, even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. For we do not proclaim ourselves. We proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your slaves for Jesus' sake. For it is the God who said, let light shine out of darkness, who has shown in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ.
Let light shine out of darkness. We come back to that theme of light and darkness in this Epiphany season as we kind of close it out.
So it's a theme of light and dark, of veiled and unveiled, of seeing and not seeing. So here it's talking about blindness and the gospel being veiled for unbelievers. They're not able to see and witness the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ. But it also says that those who are believers experience the light of Christ not only in Christ in person, but in their hearts. It says God has shown in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. And so the transfiguration which we're about to read in Gospel of Mark, happens in this historical moment with Peter, James, and John on the top of a mountain. But there's also this notion that the transfiguration also happens within each one of us if we pay attention, if we submit ourselves to it, if we allow ourselves to see the truth of the person of Christ as the light of the world, the glory of God, the image of God. So we can look at the gospel reading then. Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 9. We get this story. I can't remember offhand if it's in all four gospels or if it's in all three synoptic gospels. But it's not just a Markan narrative. And the story is that Jesus takes Peter, James, and John, just three of his disciples, and leads them up on a high mountain apart by themselves. And while they're up there, Jesus is transfigured before them. His clothes become dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there they also see with Jesus on one side Elijah and on one side Moses, and they're talking together. And so Peter steps up and says, Rabbi, it's great for us to be here. Let's make 3 tents or 3 dwellings, one for each of you, because he didn't really know what to say in the midst of it. And then at that moment, a cloud overshadowed them, and there was a voice from heaven. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him, which are the same words essentially that were spoken at Jesus's baptism. Mm-hmm. And suddenly, after that voice, Peter, James, and John looked around and they didn't see anyone there except Jesus, dressed in his regular ways. Right. And then they went down to the mountain back to be with people. And Jesus kind of gives this offhanded remark to not share with people what had happened until later, until, as it says in this gospel passage, the Son of Man had risen from the dead.
There's so many ways to enter and to look at this passage. I mean, we could probably, between the two of us, come up with a dozen different sermons and just points that we would focus on. We can't do that now. We don't have time. I'm sorry. But for me, for some reason, I am thinking about how our corporate worship, how gathering for church on Sunday, or really anytime we gather for worship, and especially around the Eucharist specifically, how the Eucharist is a type of transfiguration. It is a type of moment, a mountaintop moment, to use kind of camp language. And what strikes me is a Roman Catholic doctrine about Eucharist, and I'm not talking about transubstantiation. I'm not talking about that, but a Roman Catholic idea that in the Eucharist we have source and summit. That the Eucharist is both the source of the energizing kind of fuel for our journey, for our own transformations into the body of Christ, but that it is also in gathering around the altar and receiving the body and the blood, that it is the summit of our Christian experience. It is that thin place where heaven and earth have met, and where we are, one with the saints in light, right? With all the company of angels and archangels and the saints and everyone in heaven. And so for me, as I read this passage, I like to read it individually. I like to think of my own mountaintop moments where I have felt close to God. Mm-hmm. And yet, on this particular day, in my reading at this particular moment, I want to think about it corporately. I want to think about it as a community, and how Jesus took Peter, James, and John to be part of that community with him. Yeah. Now, Peter gets it wrong, quote unquote. I mean, he wants to make that their home. He wants to build a nice mountaintop house, but that it still doesn't diminish the fact that Jesus that Jesus is going up there was not so much about what it did for Jesus, but what it did for Peter, James, and John. And I think that's the piece that I'm kind of dwelling in right now, that when we have these communal experiences that are summit experiences, mountaintop moments, how then do we dwell in that moment? And then how do we come back down the mountain and having been fed from the Eucharistic table, from the altar, and now go, as you mentioned, I think quite appropriately on Sunday in your sermon, out into the world, out onto the wire between the two kind of rock solid places. Right. And I think we do that together. We don't just do that alone. Right. And so how we support each other, how we are with each other as a body, as a church community, as brothers and sisters in Christ, and I don't think the answer, by the way, is moralistic. I don't think it's just follow the 10 Commandments and you're going to be good to go. I think there's actually a piece here that we can kind of hear Elisha echoing in our head saying, I want a double dose of that spirit, right? That spirit of mountaintop bliss. I'd like that we share, and that in that we're supported and loved and sent out to do that work at the bottom of the mountain,
in community. And you alluded to this as well in your comments, but it's not just the community of the disciples, but it's the community of heaven. When we gather together, there are two sides that are coming together, and as we say in the liturgy, with angels and archangels, and with all the company of heaven, who forever sing this hymn, we sing as well. So that is what we're seeing here, that heaven and earth is just a thin place. Heaven and earth are not that far away from one another than maybe what we think. And the community of Peter, James, and John are empowered and accompanied by the heavenly community of Moses, Elijah, and Jesus, who kind of stands in both of those communities. And as they go back down the mountain, Jesus walks back down with them. But they can also be assured that in some sense, the heavenly company of saints is also in some way with them. So as we are thinking about our community and what it means to be community, what it means to experience and witness Christ together, but then also to take that out into the world as a community, to walk back down the mountain, we can also be assured that we are doing it in the company of the saints that have gone before us for generations upon generations upon generations. Elijah was still with Elisha in some way. And as we continue our message today, we are also joined, and not just by the saints that we know of, but the saints that we don't know of. The people are forerunners here at Good Shepherd that have gone before us, people that have been here for a long time, and even
the
before
footsteps
that,
we follow in,
the footsteps, and even St. Martin's Episcopal Church, which was the first sort of church presence or Episcopal presence here in Jupiter to Cuesta. They are with us as we continue to walk this way. So,
and I think the method, right, the spiritual means by which we do some of that is the same as what we've been, what we've been talking about with these other readings. It is to be aware. Be aware. It is to be intentional, and not just about ethereal matters of, is God, where is God, and all of these kind of what we would consider less grounded thoughts. I mean, we're reminded in our psalm, and I think we're reminded by Paul in 2 Corinthians, that our awareness is just in seeing the other. So when I'm at Eucharist and I'm not feeling particularly spiritual, I might not be feeling like I've reached the summit of that thin place where heaven and earth are gathered around the altar. But if I'm aware of the person sitting next to me, who might be, a sign or a symbol of that rich community, of that connected thin place, to use that kind of, I can just witness in them the truth of the gospel. I don't have to necessarily, I mean, that's the whole history of salvation, is God constantly coming into midst people's families and communities and individuals, so that God would be made known in their face, right? And as all of creation kind of gathers to declare God's presence with us. And so if you ever feel like you're sitting in church and you're like, I'm just not feeling it today, that's okay. That you don't have to feel it. That's not what we're about in the Episcopal Church. But what we are about is about gathering together so that on the days when you're not feeling it, you can look across the pew and you can kind of see someone who can stand there with you.
That's good. Yeah, I love that. Well, I look forward to hearing your sermon on Sunday.
Oh, I do too.
Yeah. We'll see where it goes.
I look forward to writing it at some point.
Yeah, I think a lot of our listeners that watch before the service like to kind of anticipate, what is the sermon going to be? Is it going to be what we talked about? Is it not? And so
If you're keeping track, let us know how we're doing.
Well, people have come to me and mentioned, oh, I saw that you went this way with the sermon, which was the same or different from hear these words.
A lot happens between now on Tuesday morning and Sunday morning. So the Spirit can take us in any direction.
That's right.
Good.
Well, thank you for listening in today to hear these words. You can join us every week and never miss an episode. Just subscribe to the podcast, whether that's on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can share it with your friends. It's always good to share. We look forward to worshiping with you this Sunday and hope that now you feel a little more prepared to hear these words. See you later.